Hello, everybody, and welcome into Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day, and on this episode, I'm thrilled to welcome Martin Armstrong to the program, an economic forecaster who has been called on by governments around the world in times of crisis, including the Reagan administration and Margaret Thatcher. According to Martin's sources, discussions are currently underway to send 250,000 NATO troops into Ukraine. How would such a move play out in terms of escalating the conflict? And why are the Western elites so hell-bent on victory at any cost? Martin's Socrates AI program is also predicting global wars intensifying starting in August through September of this year. What are the signs it's seeing that are signaling a potential world war is about to erupt? All of this and so much more ahead. So strap yourselves in for my conversation with Martin Armstrong. Martin Armstrong, great to have you back on Commodity Culture. I want to start with a few things you wrote in some of your recent reports regarding the Russia-Ukraine conflict. But one thing that's top of mind at the moment that we have to talk about is Trump reducing the grace period he was giving Russia. He said they had 50 days to come to the table and get some sort of peace negotiation hammered out with Ukraine, or he was going to put big tariffs on them, perhaps other sanctions as well. I think Lindsey Graham has been running around acting as the decision maker when it comes to all this, and he brought this to Trump. It seems Trump's on board, and now he's reduced. He said 10 or 12 days. He's reducing it. What is going on here, in your opinion, behind the scenes that would cause him to make such a move? And is he serious about this? Because we know he flip-flops a lot. Is this just something he'll say today and forget about tomorrow? What are your thoughts?
I don't think he's going to forget about it. I mean, at this point, I think his success in negotiating with tariffs is blinding him to the geopolitical issues here. Um, and I mean, to put it bluntly, I mean, I think he's being played as a fool now, the same way as the West played Putin for a fool. You know, they signed the Minsk agreement and all this other nonsense. And then you had Merkel actually come out and said, well, we never intended to honor it, just to allow Ukraine to build an army. Then there was another peace deal, and Putin was signing that, and Boris Johnson hopped on the plane, went to you can't sign that. So, I mean, I don't know. Trump is who the hell's got his ear if it's Lindsey Graham, who I think should be in prison personally. But telling Putin you got 10 days to sign a peace deal. This is the guy that signed a peace deal to begin with, and then a second one. If I'm him, I'm not signing anything. All right. I personally would give them 30 days, maybe now 10. Remove Zelensky, let the Ukrainian people vote for themselves. They're not in charge of their own country. I've spoke to Ukrainians and they have a valid question. Are they allowed to have peace without permission from London, Paris, Berlin, and Washington? If it doesn't meet their criteria, forget it. They're just pawns. And in all honesty, I have heard, even mentioned, unbelievably, but, what the hell, they were all communists anyhow. I mean, there's no respect for these people. The same thing in Romania. They interfered in their elections. Why? Because NATO's building the biggest, air base in Romania to attack Russia. They don't give a shit about the Romanian people. They voted they did not want to go into war. And the second election, I had some people that were there, and they said even Macron came to make sure they still won. So, look, they did this to start World War II. You had FDR do the same shit, put all these sanctions, cut off the energy for Japan. They were buying all the energy from the United States. That's why Japan invaded Manchuria, to get energy. All right. And basically what happened was that there was a big Senate investigation on this because FDR really deliberately created Pearl Harbor to get us into World War II because Congress kept saying no, no, no. They would not join Europe. And it came out that, the U.S. had broken the code of the Japanese in advance and knew when Pearl Harbor was going to take place. I have on my site, I think it was 2 or 3 days before the Honolulu Tribune, the information was leaked. They put it on the front page. We're going to be attacked that weekend. So all this bullshit. Oh, this is a day that lives in infamy. All this nonsense. He pulled out all the aircraft carriers, the ones he didn't want to lose, and let the others sit there and over 3,000 guys die. For what? For propaganda. All right? This is what the neocons are doing again. And you can look it up. There was a big Senate investigation on this against FDR. And the question was, did he know in advance? And as there was plenty of evidence with the breaking of the code, and it was like 9/11. Well, some people had information, but didn't share it or something like that, And the conclusion was, well, we're not entirely sure FDR personally knew in advance. They're not going to come out and tell the truth. It's just not going to happen. And so, Trump, I think, I guess he's listening to Lindsey Graham, and who's behind him is probably John Bolton, and the rest of them, and Bill Kristol, and you name it, all the neocons. They just want war. They don't care about the people. They don't care about the country. Nothing. Only their objective. And that's all they ever look at. You had Robert McNamara. You can look at his apology it's on YouTube. He took us into Vietnam. Before he died, he says, "Oh, very sorry, we were wrong. We thought Russia was involved. It was just a civil war." Well, 58,000 Americans died because he was wrong. They don't care. He thinks he's cleaning his conscience before he dies. Tony Blair's apology, also on YouTube, for the weapons of mass destruction that never existed. And, well, we thought we were, freeing the people of Iraq from the tyranny of Saddam, but we subjected them to more sectarian violence. Terribly sorry. Look, I know Bill Kristol. He even spoke at one of our conferences. His father's the one that started the whole neocon movement. And what a lot of people need to know is I think they got into Trump using Netanyahu. I grew up in Philadelphia area. Netanyahu went to school there. He hung out with the Kristols, family affairs, etc. He is a neocon. Okay? The same as Kristol, the same as Bolton, the same as all of them. I think they got into him using Netanyahu, and Trump is always a head of state. No, he's the same as them. Look at what he's done in Gaza. Just killing civilians, wiping them out. He's having to back off. Even the military's objecting to it now. And this is what they are. They don't care about human life. They don't. I don't know what it is. They just have to win, and they don't give a shit. And this is the danger. NATO is nothing but a neocon retirement home. It's all, their sole purpose is war. That's it. Why anybody listens to them? Well, here's a gun. Might as well go over and start just shooting people. See how long you last. They don't care. They really don't care.
And now a quick break to hear from our sponsor, ARC Silver Gold Osmium owner Ian Everard is considered one of the most honest and level-headed gold and silver dealers in the United States, praised even by his competitors. So give him a call today to take advantage of the specials right now. Silver Kangaroos 2023 1-ounce coins, mint fresh, only $2.47 over spot. Mint fresh silver maple leafs 2025 coins, 1 ounce, $2.87 over spot. While supplies last. Reach out today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And now, back to the interview. Well, I think that segues perfectly into these reports that you've put out recently. I want to read a quote from one of them. You wrote, "Reliable sources are saying that the discussions now behind the curtain are calling for NATO to declare a proxy war on Russia, and that they are intending to send in 250,000 troops to Ukraine." Could you expand on that for us? When do you think these troops might get sent, and what could such a move potentially do to provoke the Russians to potentially, directly attack NATO countries in retaliation? Do you see that as a possible response?
Putin is probably the most responsible and intelligent person sitting at the table. I know all the propaganda is against Putin, but step back and be objective. All right, he has laid down so many red lines. Give long-term missiles to shoot. That's it. They do. Invade Russia. They did. He has laid so many red lines, and they cross each one, trying to get him to attack anything in NATO so they can claim that he is the aggressor. All right. This is why Zelensky tried to assassinate him several weeks ago. All right. Why? You remove Putin, this does not end the war. It's going to make it worse. You're going to get somebody like Medvedev. What was he saying? We should attack now before the 50 days is up. They want somebody not like Putin who's responsible and knows where this is going to lead. They want someone who's going to respond emotionally. Oh, you invaded Kursk? That's it. Push the button. I mean, this is what they want. So they can claim to historians, oh, they started it, not us. It's always the bullshit that they come up with. And so you're looking at, Trump with his tariffs, it's the same thing I see as what they did to Japan. They also froze all the assets in Japan and confiscated all Japanese money in the United States. Haven't they done that to Russia? Oh, you knew Putin? Oh, you had a drink with him once? You lost everything. This is, and the neocons have done a good job on really screwing Europe. World War II, Sweden was neutral. So was Switzerland. Okay? Switzerland confiscated, at least $8 billion of Russians? This is what we want you to do? Sweden gave up neutrality, joined NATO. So what I've been hearing is that Russia, they know that Russia's going to win. I mean, this is kind of like Cuba trying to invade the United States. I mean, let's get real here. There's isn't a prayer in hell that Ukraine can defeat Russia. Come on. You had somebody like Medvedev in charge instead of Putin, Kiev will be gone by now. And Zelensky, I mean, I can tell you, I spoke to Ukrainian military. They were told just to go to the border. They had no idea they're going to invade the Kursk region. That order came from MI6. All right. People that I speak to, they basically say if Zelensky was on fire, they wouldn't urinate on him until he was dead. They, after there was the attempted assassination of him in May of last year, who were his bodyguards? Americans and Brits. He doesn't trust Ukrainians. All right. I don't blame him. I don't see how this guy could possibly step down from power and remain in Ukraine. I don't know where he's going to go. I hope the hell he doesn't come to Miami. But he is, I mean, there's videos. He's taken kids with Down syndrome and kidnapped them and sent them to the front line. Come on. I mean, what the hell's going on here? It's, he's deliberately outlawed the Russian language, outlawed their religion, beating up Orthodox priests. Even the Pope has come out against them. You can't do this to people's religions, and so they know Ukraine's going to fall. So it's getting very, if you look at most of the stories, oh, Russia's weak, they're losing, whatever, just look at the source. It's usually ISW, Institute for the Study of War. Who is that? Victoria Nuland's sister-in-law. A Neocon organization. Not independent. All right. So NATO's been looking at sending in 250,000 troops. The precedent is they did that to Bosnia in 1995 and they did it to Kosovo in 1999. Neither had anything to do with NATO. All right. What was the excuse? Oh, humanitarian. Okay. So they go in and they bomb the hell out of Serbs. Why? Because they supported Russia. That's it. And so that's the precedent that I'm hearing. They're going to call it humanitarian because Ukraine's going to fall. So they'll send in 250,000 troops. And the reason I did finally publish it is that one of the NGOs finally sent out a letter to some of its members privately confirming that they're going to do that. So I said, all right, fine. It's no longer just a rumor. And they can't afford to let Ukraine fall. If they fall, all they've ever done is, oh, if that falls, Putin's going to take all of Europe, or all this bullshit. All right. There's nothing in Europe that is worth taking. They have no energy. They got to buy that from Russia. All right. They have no real gold reserves. All right. This is NATO propaganda. And they put it as, when Khrushchev said, we will bury you. That was all about, essentially, it was a philosophical war. Communism versus evil capitalism. All right. So it wasn't for conquest. It wasn't for money. It was an economic religious war in a way, And Russia, communism fell. The Russian people aren't interested in going back to communism. That's why Putin was so popular, because Yeltsin was getting attacked by the U.S. on one side. They stick in their puppet Baryshnovsky, an oligarch. And on the other side, the old communists filed a motion for impeachment to get rid of Yeltsin, trying to take it back to the USSR. And that's why he turned to Putin. He wasn't a communist and he wasn't, an oligarch. And that's why he was so popular that people cheered largely because they didn't want to go back the other way. And the same thing in China. I mean, they don't want to go back to communism either. Once they get a taste of freedom, and I think they got more billionaires than the United States does. Then oh yeah, let me give it all to the government and go back. Yes, no, not going to happen. So NATO's propaganda. Oh, Russia wants to take. It's the same thing from the Khrushchev days. All right, but the motive is different. It's not there anymore. So, the 250,000 troops is because Ukraine's running out of people to hand the gun to. They know they're about to fall. That's why Zelensky was repealing the corruption laws. Let's stuff as much money in our pockets, get ready to leave. That's basically what he was really doing. Even the U.S. came out and said, "Hey, you shouldn't be doing this. This doesn't look proper." Because the rats are just ready to jump ship. So NATO sources are basically saying they intend to send in 250,000. Call them peacekeepers, call them humanitarian, whatever nice word you want to attach to it. And I mean, look, Europe just wants war, and they're listening to these neocons. Czechoslovakia, it's split. Czech Republic, Slovakia, ethnically. Yugoslavia, split up, divided ethnically. That was the solution, the Minsk agreement for Ukraine. This is what the West did not want because they want the war. And I think the biggest example of that was Boris Johnson hopping on the plane. No, you're not allowed to sign that. And I even made the front pages of Ukrainian press. And that's when I started hearing, are we even allowed to have peace?
And what do you think Putin's response would be to 250,000 NATO troops entering Ukraine? Because as you mentioned, a lot of red lines have already been crossed. I believe there's a lot of people in Russia who are kind of critical of Putin for not, stepping up to the plate and actually engaging in any sort of counterattacks when all of these red lines are crossed. This would seem to be potentially the final red line. Would this finally be the straw that makes Putin say, okay, now we have to go on the offensive in a much more serious way and perhaps engage in a war with NATO? How would that all play out?
I think if he doesn't, he will be replaced by November. I mean, this is look. You've had Kalis, the former PM of Estonia, now running foreign national security at the EU, actually coming out and say Russia's too big, needs to be broken up. What if Putin said that about Europe or the United States? Oh, that's outrageous. What they say against Russia it's okay. You had Lindsey Graham, the tapes in the meeting with, I put them on our site, with Zelensky. This is the best money we ever spent to kill Russians. Now, if you said that about blacks or Muslim, wouldn't that be a hate crime? Oh, Russia, it's okay. It's the hypocrisy going on is just it's too much. I'm sometimes I wish I was just one of those people with the mask on, driving in my car by myself and not knowing anything. Um, thinking they actually care about me. It's I don't know. I never wanted to go down this far down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, speaking of going down the rabbit hole, your Socrates computer program is showing that from August and particularly into September, things could really heat up on the war front. Now, we've already seen a skirmish breakout between Thailand and Cambodia. I think 30 something people dead. Well, it seems like there's a ceasefire now going in place. They're going to start talking it out. We'll see. But do you think we could see more of these types of conflicts erupt around the world? Or do you think most of the action is going to be focused on Russia, Ukraine, potentially the Middle East, the conflicts that are currently already ongoing?
No, I think looking at history, for whatever reason, war seems to be a contagion, like the flu or something like that. All right. I don't know what it is, but the only way I could explain it is that there are old grudges. All right. And like the American Revolution takes place, then the French go, that's a good idea. Then the French Revolution is taking place, when Washington's being sworn in. If you look at these things, you'll see civil wars in Japan and England, Russia, all at the same time. Even in ancient times, Rome overthrew its Tarquin kings in 509. Within 6 months, the Athenians were overthrowing their tyrants and democracy's born. Tiananmen Square falls, then the Berlin Wall falls within a couple months. It just seems that there is some sort of maybe a connection in that people hear about that and go, that's a good idea. That's all I can explain. They're not connected in the sense of a geopolitical issue. The issues are different wherever you look at. But it's just maybe settling old grudges or something. We handed a handful of jets to Greece and it made the front pages. They actually said, oh, now we can do a sneak attack on Turkey. The two NATO countries. But, the bad blood there goes back to Alexander the Great. So it's Ukraine is this similar thing. I mean, we had two employees there. The one from Kiev, we had a conference in Athens. And the one from Kiev refused to fly back the quickest way because the plane stopped in Moscow. Spent twice as long to get home just to avoid a 1 hour stopover in Moscow. And I said, but I even tried to explain. I said, do you realize it wasn't the Russians that starved you? Oh, yes, it was. I said, no, it wasn't. All right. The guy, his name was Kaganovich. I hate to tell you, but he was born in Kiev. He happened to be Stalin's right-hand man. All right. Most scholars actually believe because he was Jewish, they think that he was maybe advising Stalin to take the food from Ukraine because they had killed Jews before. So was it payback? Why steal all the food from Ukraine? And he was in charge of it, and he was from Kiev. So look, you're getting into motives and thinking processes and stuff like that, but it wasn't a Russian per se. Even Stalin was from Georgia. So I've heard the debates in Moscow. Who's really Russian? um, the same thing happened in the Roman Empire. Suddenly, basically you had emperors coming from not from Italy. Philip the First around 235. They call him Philip the First from the Arab. It came from Syria. So you have people becoming emperor from all over the place. So it wasn't just Italian or Roman. Um, so that's pretty much what happened to Russia. I mean, even looking at the United States, you had Obama, the first black man becomes president. Things change over time.
And so when it comes to global conflicts, your thought is that this could be somewhat of a contagion and that we could start to see other nations enter new wars in addition to this potential Russia versus NATO showdown and the wars in the Middle East that, the whole Israel Hamas conflict as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably going to see even tensions rising between Greece and Turkey and the rest of the area. Turkey, to some degree, wants to resurrect, Erdogan wants to resurrect the Ottoman Empire. You see the abuse of Netanyahu in Gaza is causing a lot of other places to get upset. Even UAE is looking at dropping in, food, stuff like this. In Asia, you got, India, Pakistan, long-term disputes. Even within China, Tibet area versus, all these things are historically, they've been there for a long time. You think they're settled for a while, but they're not. People always remember. And, that's pretty much it. So I think what's happening in Thailand is the same thing. It's, that goes back to when the French drew the borders. I think back in like 1907 or something. And then, you're going to see, tensions even with Singapore. Malaysia is like, they just separated things. I mean, all of this. You had China versus Taiwan, which I think has now become inevitable. When you see it escalating with, I would say, Russia versus NATO, that would be the perfect time for them to take Taiwan. And my sources also confirm that China will be backing Russia, mainly because it's painfully obvious that this is not a war with Ukraine. This is a war with NATO. You had Boris Johnson actually come out, made the front pages of Norwegian press. Britain, we are in a proxy war with Russia. So they're not even hiding it. You got Merz basically saying we're going to give long-range missiles to Ukraine so they can attack Moscow. So let's see. They sunk the Lusitania because it was sending arms to Britain. If Ukraine was in war with Germany and Russia gave them long-term missiles to level, basically Berlin, what would you do? It's just, I had hoped that when Trump was elected, we were at least trying to defeat the war cycle, but the computer's always been right. I'm the one that's wrong. I mean, maybe the difference is that had Camilla won, we'd be in World War III already. But what our computer shows is that the tensions should be rising from basically from next week onward. And maybe this dovetails into why, forecasting in advance that Trump is going to lower it from 50 days to 10. But what's even worse is that our computer has a what we call a panic cycle on a yearly level in war, international war, and that's in 2026. I mean, these are not common things for the computer to put out. And so I think being that you're going to see more of a contagion, and then war is just going to be escalating pretty much everywhere, really. If England and France didn't have a common enemy being Putin, they'd probably go to war again. They have a long history of hating each other.
Well, I want to touch on what's happening also in regards to mass migration within countries, because we have all this geopolitical risk, global conflict breaking out, but it seems like there's a bit of a controlled demolition happening within a lot of these countries. It's happening in my home country of Canada. It's especially prevalent in the UK and the EU. A lot of people with cultural views that are very different from the West and who come from very dangerous countries as well, where violence is much more of a common way to solve problems, are being let in with no vetting process. And in many cases, they're being given free room and board. We hear about these migrant hotels in the UK. They're getting given weekly allowances in some cases. So then they're calling up their other friends from Afghanistan, Syria, wherever, and saying, hey, they're giving out money if you just come over here. Now, I need to be careful here. I'm 100% for legal immigration. I am an immigrant. I live in Serbia, but I don't get anything, and I have to pay taxes, and the Serbian government isn't helping me out with anything here. But the issue with these Western countries is that it's gotten to such a boiling point. We're starting to see big protests, maybe even riots breaking out in the UK, Ireland as well. And many of these countries where so much immigration is being pushed, it feels like it's on purpose. The thing that I feel like a lot of the news shows that cover this are missing, they're saying this is going to be a disaster. There's going to be civil unrest. We're already seeing riots. Surely, these politicians realize this is happening. What's going on here? Well, it feels like the politicians know very well that it's going to create civil unrest, and they're pushing for it anyways. So it feels like a purposeful act to sow chaos, create division within society, and foment civil unrest. Am I correct in thinking that? And if so, what's the end game here for the people who are pulling the levers behind the scenes?
You might be giving them too much credit. I'm not so sure that they're that smart. Right? The whole migration issue, the reason they began it was first it was Merkel that started it. And she was against bailing out Greece. And she was being portrayed as evil, whatever. I mean, that Greece had even forgiven, the debts of Germany after the war. And here she's like screwing, every, Greek and refusing to give money. So when the Syrian issue began, that's when she said, oh, well, we'll open our borders to them. And they even put her on the front pages of magazines in Germany, Mother Merkel, as if she was some sort of saint. Then it migrated from just protecting her reputation, showing that Europe was completely a joke, where one leader can dictate to the entire continent just to save her personal reputation. And nobody got to vote on this. And then the rest of them were looking at it. It then migrated to, well, we need these people because the birth rate is going down. And if we don't have an increasing population, all the pension funds will fail. So that was the next excuse. I don't think they realized that they were taking in people from the Middle East with completely different cultures. That the difference, I think, was that you're looking at really when people came from Europe to America, it was to get away from that stuff, but they assimilated. As you know, when they were forming the euro, they came to me, and I warned them, and they weren't consolidating the debt. I said the euro is never going to compete with the dollar without a consolidation. All right, but I also warned them about trying to alter cultures and things of this nature. I said, you don't understand what made America great. And they go, oh, what do you mean? I said, it was discrimination. I said, how could you possibly say that? I said, because it was fair. Whoever was the last off the boat, you won the job, you had to speak English. All right? There was no welfare or any of this stuff. So today you ask an American or a Canadian even, what are you? Oh, I'm half Irish, half German, whatever, which you don't see in Europe. Once everybody spoke the same language, then everybody intermarried. You don't see somebody from Scotland marrying somebody from Sicily. Maybe one or two, maybe. But it's not common. I was a keynote speaker for the BIS conference in Paris years ago. And so I sat at the table with all the heads of the central banks. And the table started speaking English because it was the only common language everybody knew. The Italian didn't know how to speak German. And, the Frenchman sitting next to me was absolutely livid. Oh, this is Paris. We should be speaking French. My opinion is they just are pissed off that they think if Napoleon had won, the world would be speaking French instead of English. I think that's basically what it comes down to. But, you're originally from Canada, outside of Quebec, everybody has to have signs in English and French, but inside Quebec, they're only in French, So, this is, I think that now you're looking at massive civil unrest because of this migration problem. But Europe is far worse than North America. And you have these people that have come in. In Sweden, they set up areas and they put up their own signs, Sharia law here. They're not assimilating. They're not interested. They just brought wherever they left and said, we're going to recreate it here. I was in Germany and last August, and it was like, I said, gee, where are all the migrants? Oh, the government pays a 2-week vacation to go back to the very countries that they fled from for political reasons. I said, oh, that's very nice. A 2-week paid vacation by the German government. You can't make up this stupid stuff. It's crazy. But, when people came to North America, there were no free handouts. It's a completely different thing at this stage in the game. And this is what's going on. And this is why I did warn the White House that they better prevent Israel from attacking the Ayatollah, assassinating him. I said, he's the head of a religion. Okay, about 30% of the population, even of Egypt and other countries on average, are Shiites. That would be kind of like, the patriarch of Moscow assassinating the Pope, you know, or a Protestant. I mean, come on. I mean, there's certain things you can't do, and religion is at the top of that list. You can do wars for conquest to make money. Okay, that's like Alexander the Great. But there's no way he could have said, well, we're going to go invade this country. Well, what are we going to get out of it? Because the troops, benefited from the spoils of war. Oh, nothing. I just don't like them. Oh, really? You're on your own. Thank you. Goodbye. They turned and prevented him from going into India for that very reason. So, I mean, wars take place for different motives. And this is why I say that NATO's constant claims of Putin wants to go into Europe for what? Okay, we're not talking about a philosophical issue here of communism versus capitalism anymore. There's nothing there to get. This is Alexander the Great on the borders with India. There's nothing there. All right. So it's just propaganda. And so this migration problem with Europe is especially dangerous because as Israel and Netanyahu, what his real objective was to conquer Iran, but regime change. So he took out all the leaders, and at least Trump, perhaps listened and said, no, don't touch the Ayatollah. They kill everybody else around them. But this is what they do. They took out the head of Hamas. They think assassinating the leaders and they can bring down, cut off the head of the snake and the snake will die. It's not always true. Historically, it's just not. But, Netanyahu is definitely a neocon. He seems to have convinced Trump, and I think that's what got Trump into this change of heart with Russia, etc. I can't prove that, but I think just knowing Crystal and that whole thing, and I, as you know, I mean, I went to Mar-a-Lago for dinner with Trump back, in 2020, when he said he wanted to pull the troops out of Afghanistan, but the reason was he was tired of sending letters to their families. Your son died for God and country, and he said, "What the hell are we doing there? They've been fighting over borders for 1,000 years." So that's why I kind of supported him initially. I thought, okay, fine. That's the first time I heard a head of state even, lament about the people that die in the battlefield. Most of them, they don't pay attention. That's just collateral damage. This is like a football game. We just got to win. And they don't think about the cost. The children that grow up with their, father died in war or whatever, or mother. But, the whole, when I look at history, I mean, I've studied pretty much every motive and things of this nature, and I can tell you that the rule of law was different in Athens versus Europe. In Athens, if I killed somebody in your family, all right, you were then justified to kill anybody in mine. Even if I committed the crime and you couldn't get to me, you could kill somebody else inside my family. It was more like Hatfield-McCoy type thing. All right. The only crime against the state that you'd be put on trial for, like Socrates, was a crime against the state itself or the gods. But murder, private disputes were not actionable. The family had to prosecute somebody. All right. That didn't really take place in Western society until after Magna Carta. Then the king would basically impose fines. They were called amercements. And, it was said that there had hardly been a man in England that hadn't been immersed at least 2 or 3 times a year. So the Magna Carta was a revolution in the sense demanding trial by jury. So the king was no longer allowed to determine what the fine was. The jury was. So that's when the king changed the law. So now if you and I just had a fist fight, that disturbed his peace. So he then gets to charge us. Okay, so if I killed you, I'm now charged with murder. All on this theory of we have disturbed the king's peace. Okay, so the problem you have is that Athenian law has dominated the Balkans. So like the Russian mafia will routinely say the worst one in the country are the Armenians. Why? Because basically an Italian mafia, if you were in there and that you did something, they'd kill you and send flowers to your wife. Okay. But an Armenian, they're going to kill you, your wife, the kids, and the dog. Because of that retribution that goes back to what I'm talking about. Anybody in your family then has a right to retaliate against them. So the solution was take them all out. So that's why they consider Armenian mafia the worst. So these are cultural differences from regions that have affected history. And with this migration thing, you're allowing people in that have completely different cultures. In Germany, I think it has come out that there were 1,000 girls that were actually raped on New Year's Eve a couple years ago. And the government, to hide what happened, they told the police, don't use the word rape, call it assault. So I'm not sure that these politicians with the migration stuff know what they have done. But they're not going to admit what's happened. Then they have to admit that they were wrong.
Yeah. And I want to end on discussing the neocons once more, because one thing that you have been harping on is that we need to throw these people out of power if we ever hope to see a real lasting peace. But I'm wondering, how is that possible, particularly when most people in the West seem content to sleepwalk into their own cultural and economic demise? I mean, most people don't pay attention to any of this stuff and don't even know what the word neocon means, and would probably call you a conspiracy theorist just for, speaking about it. So when your average citizen has this mindset in the West, how do we get these people out of power?
I think, honestly, if we look at history as a guide, it's not going to happen until you get into war. Then they'll get off their ass and go, what the hell's going on?
Like a direct war, as in like America actually being attacked,
yeah.
Or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not, it's something is going to have to happen. I will say this. I was speaking to someone very high up and close to Trump, maybe a couple months ago. And I thought they would think I was, you know, just kind of out there. I said, look, NATO's going to create a false flag to invoke Article 5 to get us into war. We should get the hell out of NATO. Pretty provocative statement, I thought. The response was, yes, we know you're right. Really? Okay. So maybe the average person may think some of this stuff is conspiracy theory. They know it's real. And my question is, look, you take the Biden administration. You had Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State. Then you had Victoria Nuland handing out sandwiches in Maidan, all right? And then you had Garland, who started all the charges to try and prevent Trump from winning. All three, in the Biden administration, all three claimed their families were from the Ukraine region. All three claimed their families had been persecuted by Russians. So, all three are neocons. Bill Kristol, neocon. I had arguments with him in the 90s. He was telling me if we take out Saddam Hussein, Assad out of Syria, and Gaddafi, will bring peace to the Middle East. It was to protect Israel. I said, have you ever been there? It's tribal. They don't see themselves as Iraqis and Syrians and stuff. They see themselves as Sunni, Shiite, Kurd. We drew the damn borders when we carved up the Ottoman Empire, not them. So, this is reality. I just think that these people have usurped American foreign policy. And they're not all Jewish. I mean, you got like Lindsey Graham and John McCain. So it's a mix. But you can look at the video on my site. They took it down off of I think YouTube, but I've got the video of John McCain on stage in Maidan in Ukraine. This is about you. This is for peace. Overthrow your government for peace. Really? They overthrow their government. America's with you. Victoria Nuland sticks in an interim government and instructs them to start the civil war against the Donbass. Unelected. It's... I met McCain. I honestly, after shaking hands, I felt like I needed a shower. It just... he was so ingrained as a neocon. When he died, he didn't even want, he said he didn't want Trump speaking at his funeral. Even hating him in death. I don't know, but look, I think this is this is unfortunately where we're going. The only way to get rid of this, and I don't think we can stop it, the computer's just never been wrong. I wish it was. These are not my opinions. I just got to report what the hell it says. It's done an unbelievable job. I stood up in 2011, said, look, the war cycle turns up in 2014. It's all on tape. 2013, you can Google it. I even put it on the blog. I said that basically Ukraine is the country to watch. It picked Ukraine. It hasn't missed a beat. As I've said before, when I learned when we got called in by the central bank in Lebanon back in the 80s to create a model in the Lebanese pound, and they had the data back to the mid 1800s. We put it in and it came out and it said their country was going to fall apart in 8 days. I thought there was something wrong with the data. I called them. I said, hey, listen, something's got to be wrong here. And they very calmly said, well, what currency does it recommend? I said, well, the Swiss franc. Obviously, they already saw the money moving. So they were coming to me for the timing, not for the forecast. And then I found the same thing. We had a client in Saudi Arabia that calls me and says, hey, Iraq's going to start attacking Gulf in the ship, the ships in the Gulf tomorrow. He was one of the biggest shippers. What do you think gold's going to do? So you tell me a war's going to start tomorrow? Yeah. With Russia, London Financial Times report. We did a conference in June of '98, and they put it on the front page. Armstrong says Russia's going to collapse in about 30 days. That was the long-term capital management crisis, the whole 9 yards there. Russia defaults. It picks up what I've concluded over the years, how it's somebody always knows in advance, and they move money to make it safe or take advantage of it or whatever. The defense stock started rising the week before October 7th, attack by Hamas in Israel. Somebody knew. All right. It's just, it's the way it is. The SEC used our stuff on 9/11, looking at who bought puts on the airlines a few days before. This is, somebody just always knows. And the computer can't tell me you're doing it versus somebody else. It just says this is what's happening. So the tensions are going to rise, but this is global. And we are seeing it like you're talking about Iran and Pakistan, Thailand, and, Cambodia. I mean, that goes back to like 1907. It's wherever these old grudges are, they seem to be percolating up again. And correlating all of that, what I would say is, because the computer is absolutely monitoring everything, climate, economics, wars, you name it. There is definitely a correlation that I would say war does not take place when everybody's fat and happy. When the economy starts to turn down, then that's when you find war. And Europe's problem is that the economy is turning down rather hard. The stupid, COVID, then the climate change, and then the sanctions on Russia. Germany, 25% of the EU economy is shrinking in size. So, not talking about recession, we're talking about the number of possible jobs are declining. That and Japan, those two countries are actually shrinking. They're the only ones in the country that are shrinking. All right. And so there isn't a prayer in hell that the EU can avoid a sharp recession into 2028. And the faults in its structure, if they don't do something with Russia, then the people are going to be storming the parliaments with pitchforks. I do, interviews from Netherlands to Palermo. And I would say 3 years ago, when I would say, look, the EU will eventually break up, really? Now, when I do interviews, it's like, when? We've had enough. So I can see from the questions that I get, things are changing. AFD, they're a bunch of Nazis. They should be outlawed. Now they're number one party. Shifting in Portugal, shifting in Poland, Nigel Farage's Reform Party is now, number one over Tories. So they can try to claim that they can control society, but they cannot. That's the whole problem in economics. It was Marx that started it. The government has the power, and we can eliminate, personal wealth and create the land of utopia. Well, that didn't work. Keynes like, oh, okay, fine. We can raise interest rates, lower interest rates, and steer the economy and prevent recessions. That didn't work. You can't do that. There's too many variables in this, and government is not that smart. I can tell you that, I've been called into just about every foreign exchange crisis since the 70s. And I get tired of it because largely it's the same thing over and over again. And this is my conclusion. Personally, maybe your parents told you don't stick your finger in the flame of a candle. It's going to hurt. You still did it. Oh, okay, fine. It really does hurt. I'm not going to do that again. Government's incapable of learning from past mistakes. They change governments, and every new administration that comes in, we're going to change this and make it our way. And I've seen so many financial crises, and somebody comes up, oh, this is our solution. Oh, that sounds good. Never are they ever asked, has anybody tried this? Did it work? Never. 87 crash, we became, famous on that. I was called in. I wrote to Reagan and I said, if you lower the dollar by 40% when they were creating G5, that's going to cause a crash within a couple of years. Oh, why? Because you sold a third of the national debt to Japan, and now you're going to say you're going to devalue it by 40%? They're going to sell. Huh? They don't understand international finance. So when 87 crash comes, I get called into that. I didn't want to go. I said, this is just a dog and pony show. It's ridiculous. They called a friend of mine, and he said, Marty, if you don't go, they're going to come take our computers. Because they were claiming it was, computer trading that caused it. And you can read the Brady Commission report. At the very end, I got them not to do anything to our computers. But at the very end, the best I could get out of it, it says, we think foreign exchange had something to do with it. That's it. They're never going to blame government. Never. 97, I've got it on our site. I wrote to Rubin, Secretary of the Treasury, came from Goldman Sachs. He was out there doing the same shit, trying to talk the dollar down for trade so we can reduce the trade deficit. I wrote him a letter. I said, hey, listen, I got called in on the 87 crash. It didn't work, and you're going to cause the same problem. I get a response, oh, well, we're not going to really do that. What happens? Within a couple months, the 1997 Asian currency crisis starts. I was called in by Switzerland. They had the peg. Met with them. I said, listen, the peg's going to break. And no, we think we can hold it. Really. I said, history's on my side. No country's ever been able to do this. I left. I tried warning them. Peg breaks. Everybody's losing a shitload of money. My conclusion is it's always the same thing over and over and over again. And trying to, when I was young, yes, I thought I could actually make a difference, and you realize you can't. It's impossible. It's impossible.
Yeah, it certainly does appear to be that way, especially when it comes to government, as you've outlined. Well, Martin, fantastic conversation as always. Tell us about Armstrong Economics and where people can access the Socrates platform.
Go to armstrongeconomics.com. You don't have to put in any email. We don't sell advertising. We try to keep it as an informative site for the world. We're not blocked anywhere, even in China and Russia, actually. And you can go there to, asksocrates.com. That gets you into the computer. It writes over 1,000 reports every day on markets around the world, all by itself. No human interaction or anything else, so it's not biased. I think that's why we're not blocked anywhere, because they know, by the way, I'm not going to have on page 3, by the way, overthrow your government or something, So, and they want the information too. So it's the only fully functioning AI system in the world that has more than a 40-year track record. So that's basically, I think it's a slot in history.
Excellent. Well, I'll put a link in the description below, both to Armstrong Economics as well as the Socrates platform for those who want to check it out. Thank you once again, Martin, for coming on the show. It's always a blast.
Well, thank you. Take care over there.
Thank you for joining us today. Take advantage of ARC Silver Gold Osmium specials right now. Silver Kangaroos, 2023 1-ounce coins, only $2.47 over spot. Silver Maple Leafs, 2025 1-ounce coins, $2.87 over spot while supplies last. Reach out to owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com. And make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And be sure to pick up your Commodity Culture merch using the link in the description below. Hats, t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, all backed by a 100% quality guarantee. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.